My wife came home glowing from a date with her lover, only to find the kids and I were gone. No note, just silence. She had no idea that empty house was the first move in a plan 4 months in the making, and she never saw the rest coming. My name is Malcolm Harrington. People call me Mal. I'm 45 years old, and I'm a regional sales director for a company that sells industrial equipment, conveyors, compressors, hydraulic systems, mostly to manufacturing plants across the Midwest. It's not glamorous work, but I'm good at it. I built that career from the ground up, starting as a field rep driving a beat-up Chevy to client sites in Indiana and Ohio, working my way up over 17 years. I know how to read people. I know when a deal is going south before the other guy even realizes it himself. I just didn't apply that same skill set at home. Jolene and I met at a friend's 4th of July cookout back when I was 28. She was 20, bright-eyed, and laughing at something across the yard when I first noticed her. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in Columbus, and for a long time, a good, long time, things were solid. We bought a house in a suburb outside of Cincinnati. We had 2 kids, Lily, who's 7 now, and Owen, who just turned 5. I coached Owen's t-ball team last spring. I never missed Lily's school plays. I was present. That's the part that still stings when I think back on it. I was genuinely, fully there. But somewhere around the time Jolene took a marketing coordinator position at a mid-sized logistics firm, something shifted. I didn't see it right away. She started coming home later. Not every night, just often enough that it registered. She joined a professional development group that met on Thursday evenings. She started locking her phone face down on the counter every time she walked in the door. Small things. The kind of things you can explain away one by one, but when you stack them up, they form a shape you don't want to look at directly. I remember one evening in October. I got home around 6:30 to find the kids fed and parked in front of the TV, and Jolene in the bedroom with the door half closed, laughing into her phone. She stopped when I pushed the door open. The laugh died fast. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. "Just a girlfriend from work," she said, setting the phone face down on the nightstand. "Dinner's in the fridge if you're hungry." That was it. No further explanation. I heated up the pasta, sat with the kids, and told myself I was reading into nothing. The truth is, I had already started noticing the name Donovan Pierce floating around our house. He was her department director. I'd heard her mention him a few times in a neutral, professional context. But then I noticed she mentioned him less, and that absence felt louder than the mentions had. I'm not a man who spirals. I don't pace the kitchen at 2 in the morning running worst-case scenarios. That's not how I'm built. But I am thorough. I spent 20 years in sales learning to never walk into a room without knowing what I'm walking into. So when my gut told me something was off, I didn't panic. I started paying attention. By November, I had enough small observations stacked up that I made a decision. I wasn't going to tear the house apart based on a feeling. I needed facts. And to get facts, I needed help. I called a woman named Vivian Marsh on a Wednesday afternoon from my car in the parking lot of a client facility in Dayton. She came recommended by a lawyer I'd done some contract work with years back. A no-nonsense woman, former police detective, mid-50s, with the kind of voice that tells you she's seen worse than your situation and handled it. She listened to what I had without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know," I told her. "That's part of what I need to find out." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Give me 2 weeks." I drove home that evening, helped Owen with his bath, read Lily her chapter book, and kissed both of them goodnight. Jolene was already asleep, or pretending to be, when I came to bed. I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I'd built and all the ways they could come apart. I wasn't angry yet. I was still in that cold, careful place where a man goes when he knows what's coming but won't let himself fall apart before the storm hits. That part came later. Vivian Marsh called me on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days after I'd hired her. I was in a meeting with a client in Indianapolis when my phone buzzed. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and took the call standing next to a fire extinguisher mounted on a cinder block wall. "You got time to talk?" she asked. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. I wrapped up the meeting faster than I should have, walked to my rental car, and sat in the parking garage with the engine off. When I called her back, she didn't waste words. "Your instincts were right," Vivian said. "Donovan Pierce. He's her direct supervisor at the firm, director of operations. They've been meeting outside the office for at least 4 months, probably longer. I've got photos, locations, dates. A hotel off, 71 near Sharonville twice. A restaurant in Hyde Park, 3 times. Last Thursday evening, they were together for just over 2 hours while you were apparently at Owen's t-ball practice. I didn't say anything for a moment. I already knew. But knowing and hearing it confirmed out loud are two completely different things. There's more, Vivian continued. I pulled some public HR records and did some digging through a contact at the Ohio Labor Board. Jolene's received 3 salary increases in the past 22 months. The jumps are, let's say, unusual. 14%, then 9, then 12. All approved by Pierce. No performance documentation on file to justify the rate. That's not a coincidence, Mel. That's a pattern. I did the math in my head. 3 raises totaling roughly 35% over less than 2 years. On Jolene's base salary, that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $38,000 in additional annual compensation, money that had been flowing into our joint account while I had no idea what it was actually tied to. And Pierce, I said, is he married? Very much so, Vivian said. Wife's name is Carla. 2 kids, both in middle school. She has no idea, from what I can tell. I sat with that for a second. Another family. Another person walking around in the dark. Send me everything, I said. All of it. Already on its way. Encrypted file. Password in a separate message. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat in that parking garage for 20 minutes just staring at the concrete pillar in front of me. I wasn't going to fall apart in a rental car in Indianapolis. That wasn't an option. But I needed those 20 minutes to let the full weight of it settle before I drove back to the highway. I flew home that evening. Jolene had the kids in bed by the time I got in. She greeted me in the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, asked about the trip. Normal. Relaxed. The kind of performance that takes either serious nerve or a total absence of conscience. I told her the meeting went fine. Asked about her day. She said it was busy. Her department was wrapping up a big quarter. I nodded and said that was great. Then I went upstairs, kissed both kids on the forehead, and lay in the dark for a long time. The next morning I called a family law attorney named Patricia Owens, someone I got a referral to through my company's legal counsel. I set up a consultation for the following week. I told her I needed to understand my options before I made any moves. She told me that was smart. Don't confront, don't move money, don't change anything yet, she said. Let me see what you got first. I followed that advice exactly. For the next 10 days, I was the same Mal. I'd always been at home, present, even-tempered, engaged with the kids. Jolene had no idea the ground was already shifting beneath her. There was one moment during that stretch that I keep coming back to. A Saturday afternoon, the 4 of us at the kitchen table doing a puzzle with Owen, one of those chunky wooden ones with farm animals. Lily was bossing everyone around about where the pieces went. Jolene was laughing. I was watching her laugh and thinking, you have no idea what's coming. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had finally stopped lying to myself about what was real. I also spent time those evenings going through our shared financial accounts more carefully than I ever had. What I found on top of Vivian's report made my jaw tighten. Over the past 16 months, Jolene had been making regular cash withdrawals, never more than $600 at a time, always from different ATMs, always on days I was traveling for work. The total I calculated came to just over $41,000. That money hadn't gone toward the mortgage. It hadn't gone toward groceries or the kids' activities. I had no idea where it had gone, but I had a strong suspicion it had gone the same place she had on those Thursday evenings. I added that figure to my notes and sent it to Patricia Owens. Then I went downstairs and helped Owen build a block tower until bedtime. Patricia Owens had been clear with me. Don't tip your hand until you're ready to play every card at once. So I waited. I watched. I kept my face neutral and my voice steady. And I let Jolene believe she was still running the game. The opportunity came on a Friday in late November. Jolene announced at breakfast that she had a girls' night planned. Her friend Dana and a couple of women from her office, dinner and drinks downtown, probably late. She said it with just the right amount of casual, the way someone does when they've rehearsed the delivery. No problem, I told her, pouring Owen's cereal. I'll take the kids to Mom and Dad's for the night. Give you the house to yourself. She looked up from her phone. Just a flicker, half a second, of something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of a plan falling into place. That's sweet, she said. You sure? Absolutely, I said. I spent that day at work running through everything one more time in my head. Vivian's photos, Patricia's legal framework, the bank statements, the $41,000. I had everything I needed. At 4 in the afternoon, I loaded the kids into my truck, drove them out to my parents' place in Loveland, and had dinner with my mom and dad. My mom kept watching me across the table the way she has since I was 12 years old, like she could read my face through a brick wall. When I helped her clear the dishes, she put her hand on my arm. Malcolm, she said quietly, whatever's going on, you know where we are. I know, Mom, I told her. That's exactly why the kids are here tonight. She didn't ask anything more. She just nodded and squeezed my arm. I didn't go back to the house. That was the point. I checked into a hotel near the airport, ordered room service I barely touched, and sat at the small desk by the window going through my notes one more time. Outside, Cincinnati hummed along like nothing was different. Inside that room, everything was. At 12:32 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Jolene. Where are you? House is empty. Kids. I waited 4 minutes before I replied. Not to be cruel, but because a man who answers in 30 seconds looks like a man who's been sitting by the phone. I wasn't that man. Kids are at Mom and Dad's. Safe. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. I'll come by at 9. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then what's going on, Mal? I set the phone face down on the desk and went to bed. She had the whole night with that question. The empty house, the silence, the single unanswered text sitting on her screen. I wanted her to feel the weight of not knowing. The same weight I'd been carrying for 4 months. I arrived at the house at 9 sharp the next morning. Jolene was already up, sitting at the kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, a cold cup of coffee in front of her. She looked like someone who hadn't slept. She probably hadn't. I sat down across from her, laid my phone on the table with the first of Vivian's photographs already on screen, and said, I'm going to show you something, and then we're going to have an honest conversation. Probably the first one we've had in over a year. The color left her face before I said another word. That's the Hampton Inn off I-71, I said. November 4th. You told me you were working late that evening. I was at Owen's practice. I swiped to the next photo. Hyde Park Grill, October 18th. You said you were with Dana. She opened her mouth. I kept going. Vivian Marsh documented 7 meetings over 4 weeks. I have dates, times, locations. I also have your bank records. Jolene, the cash withdrawals going back 14 months. $41,000. And I have documentation of 3 salary increases approved by Donovan Pierce that have no performance basis on file. I sat back. So before you tell me anything, understand that I already know the shape of it. I'm giving you the chance to be honest, because after today, that window closes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then her jaw tightened. You had me followed, she said, her voice dropping low and sharp. You hired someone to spy on me. I gathered evidence of something you were actively hiding from me. I replied, that's not the same thing, and you know it. I can explain. Then explain the $41,000. I said, start there. She couldn't. She looked at the floor, and I watched the defense crumble piece by piece, and I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in months. The cold, clear certainty of a man who knows exactly where he stands. That morning was the beginning, not the end. The silence after I laid out the evidence was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. Jolene sat on that couch staring at the floor, and I let the silence do its work. I didn't fill it. I didn't soften the edges. I just waited. Finally, she looked up. How long have you known? Long enough, I said. What I want to know is how long it's been going on. She hesitated, pressing her lips together. 8 months, she said. Then, maybe a little longer. I nodded once. That matched what Vivian had estimated. And the money? Mal. The money, Jolene. She exhaled slowly. Hotels. Dinners. A weekend trip in September. I used cash, so there wouldn't be a record on the card. She looked at me like she expected that explanation to land somewhere other than where it did. So you planned it, I said. This wasn't something that just happened. You planned the withdrawals, planned the cover stories, planned the schedule. For 8 months. She didn't deny it. That was almost worse than if she had. What came next was the part I braced for. She pivoted, shifted from defensive to offensive the way people do when they have nothing left to defend. You were never here, Mal, she said. her voice hardening. Even when you were in the house, you weren't here. Always on the phone, always thinking about the next deal, the next client. Do you know how many dinners you missed last year? How many times I tried to talk to you, and you were already halfway somewhere else? I let her finish. Then I said, I missed 4 dinners last year. I have a calendar. And every time you wanted to talk, I was available. You just didn't want to talk about this. I paused. If you were unhappy, Jolene, I deserve to know that. We could have gone to counseling. We could have had hard conversations. What you didn't get to do was take $41,000 out of our family's account and spend it on another man, and then tell me it's my fault. She looked away. Something in her expression flickered. Not guilt exactly, but a recognition that she wasn't going to win this argument on those terms. So what now? She asked. Now we do this right, I said. For Lily and Owen, we do this like adults. I've already spoken with an attorney. I'm not interested in a war, but I'm also not going to pretend nothing happened. We'll file, we'll divide things fairly, and we'll figure out a custody arrangement that works for the kids. You're not even going to try? Her voice rose slightly. You're just going to end it? Just like that. You ended it, Jolene, I said, keeping my voice level. 8 months ago. Maybe longer. She started to cry then. And I want to be fair about this, because I don't think the tears were fake. I think some part of her had genuinely not thought through what the other side of this looked like. But I also wasn't going to be moved by them. I'd spent enough nights alone with the weight of what she'd done to know that my sympathy had limits now. I suggested counseling. Not to save the marriage, but because our attorney had recommended it as a way to establish good faith in the proceedings, and because I thought it would help us communicate better for the kids' sake. Jolene agreed, reluctantly. The therapist we saw was a woman named Dr. Ellen Pierce. She was calm and measured, which I appreciated. But in our second session, when she said, carefully, professionally, that she thought it might be worth exploring whether my emotional unavailability had contributed to the distance in the marriage, I felt something harden in me. I didn't lose my temper. I just said, very quietly, my wife spent 8 months lying to me, withdrew $41,000 from our family account, and had an affair with her married supervisor. I'd like to understand how my schedule factors into that decision. Dr. Pierce started to respond, and I stood up, thanked her for her time, and walked out. I found Dr. Raymond Holt through a veteran support network my father had connected me with. Holt was 58, former Army, built like a man who'd never stopped doing the physical work. He sat across from me in his office and listened to the whole thing without once suggesting I examine my role in Jolene's choices. When I finished, he said simply, You didn't cause this. You couldn't have prevented it. What matters now is what you build next. That was the first time in 2 months I felt like I could breathe. Patricia Owens called me on a Monday morning with that particular tone lawyers use when they've found something significant and want to deliver it in a controlled way. Mal, I need you to come in this week. There's something in the financial disclosure you should see in person. I cleared my Tuesday afternoon and drove downtown. Patricia's office was on the 14th floor of a building on 5th Street. Clean, orderly, the kind of space that tells you the person running it doesn't waste time. She poured coffee without asking, slid a folder across the desk, and let me read before she spoke. The document on top was a credit report. Jolene's, pulled as part of the standard divorce discovery process. I scanned the header, the account history, the derogatory mark section. She filed for personal bankruptcy. I said, Chapter 7, Patricia confirmed. 7 years ago. 14 months before you got married. I set the report down carefully. She never told me. No, Patricia said. And here's why that matters for you specifically. When you refinanced a house 3 years ago, the loan was structured partially on her credit profile as a co-borrower. The bank ran a soft pull, not a full history. The bankruptcy had aged out of the standard screening window by then, but the underlying pattern is relevant. Her debt-to-income ratio at the time of the refinance was misrepresented on the application. Your attorney at closing should have flagged it. He didn't. I sat back in my chair. So what does that mean practically? It means we have additional leverage in the asset division, Patricia said. It also means you should know exactly who you married, the full financial picture. She came into this marriage with a history she deliberately concealed. I thought about the letter then, the one I hadn't mentioned to Patricia yet. 2 evenings prior, I've been going through a storage box in the spare room, the kind of box that accumulates over years of marriage and never gets fully unpacked. At the bottom, Under a stack of old birthday cards and a broken picture frame, I'd found an envelope addressed to Jolene's college roommate. It wasn't sealed. It was dated 14 months before our wedding. I'd read it once, then folded it and put it in my desk drawer. In the letter, Jolene had written to her friend about me, about us, about the relationship she was considering making permanent. The phrasing I kept coming back to: he's solid, Karen. Stable. Good income, good family. I think this is the smart move. Not a word about love. Not a word about the life she wanted to build. Just a cold-eyed assessment of what I represented on a balance sheet. I hadn't been a husband to her. I'd been a financial strategy. I told Patricia about the letter. She added it to the file. On the drive home, I got a call from Dennis, Jolene's older brother. He'd reached out once before, briefly, but this time he was direct. "I need to see you," he said. "Not the house. Somewhere neutral." We met at a diner in Blue Ash the following evening. Dennis was 43, broad-shouldered, still carried himself like the Marine he'd been for 8 years. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. "I know about Piers," he said. "I've known for a while." I waited. She showed me a text from him back in August. Didn't mean to. We were sitting at Mom's kitchen table, and her phone lit up. I saw enough. He wrapped both hands around the mug. I told her to end it. She told me to mind my own business. "I should have called you then, Mal. I didn't, and that's on me." I looked at him across the table. He meant it. The guilt was sitting right there on his face, and it was genuine. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because she's about to tell her attorney that you were emotionally checked out of the marriage," he said. "And I'm not going to let that stand without saying what I actually saw. I watched you with those kids at Thanksgiving last year. I watched you with her. You weren't checked out. She was." He paused. "I'll testify if it comes to that." I thanked him and meant it. We sat there a few more minutes without much more to say, and when we got up to leave, he shook my hand and held it a beat longer than a handshake needed. That evening, I also found out, through Vivian, who continued running down a few loose threads, that Jolene's parents had met Donovan Pierce. At a birthday dinner for Jolene's mother back in September, Pierce had apparently shown up briefly, introduced as a colleague. They'd said nothing to me, not a word. I called my mother-in-law that night. Kept it short. "You knew," I said. A long pause. Then, "Mal, it wasn't our place." "You're right," I said. "It wasn't. And neither is whatever comes next. I hope Jolene has somewhere to stay, because I think this is the last conversation you and I are going to have for a long time." I hung up, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, and started drafting notes for Patricia on everything Dennis had told me. The family court preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in January. I wore a jacket and tie, not to impress anyone, but because the way a man presents himself in a room tells people something about how seriously he takes what's in front of him. Jolene's attorney was a man named Jeffrey Rask, polished, mid-40s, the kind of lawyer who specializes in making reasonable-sounding arguments for unreasonable positions. His opening framework leaned hard on the narrative that I had been emotionally unavailable, career-focused to the point of neglect, and that Jolene had been the primary caregiver for both children throughout the marriage. Patricia let him finish. Then she laid out our response in 3 parts. First, she presented Dennis's written statement, in which he described, in specific and dated terms, what he had observed over the past year. Jolene's secretive behavior, the text message he'd seen in August, and his own assessment of my involvement with Lily and Owen. Second, she submitted documentation I'd been building for 3 years without knowing I'd ever need it. A calendar log, kept on my phone, of every school event, medical appointment, practice, recital, and bedtime routine I had been present for. 1,012 entries. Rask looked at the printout and said nothing. Third, she raised the question of the $41,000 in undocumented cash withdrawals and asked Jolene's side to explain where that money had gone. Rask requested more time to respond. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with the expression of someone who had seen every variation of this kind of hearing, gave them 2 weeks. Outside the courtroom, Jolene caught my eye in the hallway. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You really built a case against me," she said, not loudly. "I built an accurate record," I replied. "That's all." She shook her head and walked away with Rask. Patricia and I went over next steps in a coffee shop around the corner. She recommended we push for full physical custody, allowing Jolene liberal visitation. She thought the financial record gave us strong standing. I told her I wanted the house sold, not bought out by Jolene, sold. She asked if I was sure. I'm sure, I said. I don't want the kids growing up in a house with that history. Fresh start. She nodded and made a note. The house went on the market in February. Jolene moved into an apartment in Norwood. She had wanted to stay in the house, had pushed Ras to argue for it. But without the financial resources to buy out my equity, and with the withdrawn $41,000 still unaccounted for, her position was weak. The sale closed in March at $422,000. We split it per the settlement agreement. It was clean, and it was final, and I felt nothing complicated about it. What I did feel something about was the afternoon Carla Pierce showed up at Jolene's office. Vivian had sent Carla the documentation package, photographs, hotel records, dates, without identifying herself as the sender. I hadn't asked her to do it, but I hadn't told her not to either. Carla Pierce, apparently, was not a woman who processed information quietly. She arrived at Jolene's office building on a Wednesday morning and, according to two witnesses whose accounts made their way to me secondhand, stood in the lobby and said, at considerable volume, exactly what she thought of women who pursued married men. Security was called. Carla left on her own terms before they arrived. Jolene called me that afternoon, furious. "Did you send her in my office?" she demanded. "No," I said, which was technically accurate. "This is harassment, Mal." "Jolene," I said calmly, "Carla Pierce found out her husband had been having an affair." She reacted, "That has nothing to do with me." I paused. Maybe have a conversation with Donovan about consequences. She hung up. Donovan Pierce, for his part, had been placed on administrative leave of the firm pending an HR investigation, initiated, as far as I could tell, by someone in the company's compliance department who had noticed the salary irregularities. He resigned 3 weeks later. I heard about it from Dennis, who heard it from Jolene, who called her brother to complain. I filed away that information and moved on. Patricia Owens called me on a Wednesday afternoon in late February with the words I'd been working toward for 3 months. "Judge Hargrove gave us primary physical custody," she said. "Jolene gets alternating weekends and 1 weeknight per week, supervised for the first 90 days, pending the financial accountability review." I was in my car in the parking garage at work when she told me. I sat there for a minute without starting the engine, just letting it settle. Not triumphant. That's not the right word. More like a man who's been carrying something heavy, finally being able to set it down on solid ground. "What about the $41,000? I asked. "She's agreed to acknowledge it in the settlement as marital funds misappropriated for personal use. It'll be factored into the asset split. You'll see it reflected in the final numbers." That had been a battle. Ras had tried 3 different frameworks to characterize those withdrawals. Personal spending within marital discretion, household expenses, even a poorly documented argument that some of it had gone toward gifts for the children. Patricia had dismantled each one methodically, with bank records, receipts, and the simple arithmetic of what her household accounts had actually been used for. The supervised visitation condition had come from Dennis's statement and from a child psychologist Patricia had engaged as an expert witness, a woman who had interviewed both Lily and Owen and noted, in careful clinical language, that Owen in particular had expressed confusion about his mother's recent absences and changes in behavior. Nothing dramatic, but enough. I picked the kids up from school that afternoon without telling them anything had changed in any formal sense. We went for pizza, their choice, which meant Owen insisted on the place with the arcade games, and Lily negotiated for extra breadsticks. Sitting across from him in that booth, watching Owen lose 3 tokens in under 60 seconds and Lily patiently explaining to him that he needed to aim differently, I felt the first clean, uncomplicated happiness I'd experienced in months. That evening I called Dr. Raymond Holt and told him about the ruling. He asked me how I felt. "Like I did what I was supposed to do," I said. "That's the right answer," he said. The formal settlement was signed in March. The house sale had closed by then, and the proceeds had been divided according to the agreement. Jolene moved into her Norwood apartment with the furniture she'd taken from the house. We divided that reasonably, without drama. She had her half of the sale. She had her car. She had every other weekend with her children. What she didn't have was the narrative she'd been trying to build. The one where I was the reason, where the marriage had failed because of my schedule and my silences and my failure to be whatever she needed. Dennis had closed that door. The financial record had sealed it. The log of 1,012 entries had locked it from the outside. Rask had made one last attempt in the final settlement conference. He'd suggested, somewhat obliquely, that my aggressive documentation habits suggested a man who had been preparing for conflict rather than investing in a marriage. I looked at him across the conference table and said, I kept that calendar because I was a present father. The fact that it also turned out to be evidence is a coincidence I'm comfortable with. Patricia smiled at her notepad. Rask moved on. The kids and I spent the last weekend of March driving up to my parents' place in Loveland. Mom made her pot roast. Dad took Owen out to the backyard to show him something in the garage. He was building a birdhouse, and Owen had apparently decided he was an expert on bird architecture. Lily sat at the kitchen table with my mother looking through an old photo album, asking questions about people she recognized and people she didn't. I stood in the doorway watching them and understood, clearly and quietly, that this was what I'd been protecting. Not a marriage that had already stopped being real. These kids, this kitchen, this ordinary Saturday afternoon. I was going to be just fine. The house sold on a Thursday. I signed the closing documents in Patricia's office, shook hands with the title agent, and drove back through a neighborhood I'd lived in for 9 years without stopping. I didn't need to stop. What I needed from that house was already gone. The kids' drawings I'd saved in a folder, the photo albums, the small wooden jewelry box my grandfather had made that sat on a shelf in my home office. Everything else was just walls. I've been renting a house in Hyde Park since February. 3 bedrooms, good school district, a backyard big enough for Owen to run in. The kids had helped me set up their rooms. Lily had strong opinions about her shelf arrangement. Owen wanted his bed under the window. I let them make every decision that was theirs to make. The night after the closing, I was going through the last box of items I'd moved out of the old house. The kind of box that holds the miscellaneous residue of a life, things that don't fit a category. Old birthday cards. A broken watch I'd meant to get repaired. A photograph from our first anniversary trip to Nashville, the two of us on a bridge somewhere downtown. I held that photograph for a moment. We looked happy. We probably were, in that specific moment, on that specific bridge. I didn't try to reconcile that image with everything that had followed. Some things can be true at the same time without explaining each other. At the bottom of the box, I found the letter again. The one Jolene had written to her college friend Karen, 14 months before her wedding. I'd read it once and filed it. I read it again now, standing in the kitchen of my rented house in Hyde Park with the kids asleep upstairs. He's solid, Karen. Stable. Good income, good family. I think this is the smart move. I folded it once and set it on the counter. Then I thought about the 17 years I'd spent being solid and stable for a woman who had filed those qualities under useful rather than loved. I wasn't angry about it anymore. Anger requires a certain amount of ongoing investment, and I had better things to invest in. What I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind that comes after a long storm finally moves through and leaves the air clean and cold and absolutely honest. I put the letter in the recycling bin. I didn't need it anymore. It had already done everything it needed to do. The next morning, I took the kids to the park down the street from the new house. Owen had decided the particular climbing structure there was a spaceship, a determination he made on day one and had not revisited. Lily brought a book and read on the bench beside me, occasionally looking up to editorialize on Owen's spaceship mission. I sat there in the April sunlight and thought about what came next. Not in an anxious way, in the way a man thinks about a project he's genuinely looking forward to starting. I thought about Kimberly Winters, a woman I'd met briefly at a fundraising dinner my company had sponsored in March. A friend had introduced us with no ulterior motive, or so he claimed. Kimberly was 43, a widow, 2 grown stepchildren from her late husband's previous marriage. She had the quality I'd come to value most in a person. She said exactly what she meant and didn't require you to decode it. We talked for about 20 minutes at that dinner. She'd asked about my work with the straightforward curiosity of someone who actually wanted to know, not someone filling conversational space. When I mentioned the kids, she'd smiled in a way that didn't perform anything, just a real, uncomplicated response to the fact that I had children I obviously cared about. I hadn't called her yet. I wasn't in a hurry. Something about the timing needed to feel right rather than urgent, and it didn't feel right quite yet. But it was getting there. I watched Owen declare that the spaceship had successfully landed on Jupiter and begin the complex process of disembarking, which apparently involved jumping off the platform twice and rolling in the wood chips. Lily looked up from her book, assessed the situation, and went back to reading. I leaned back on that bench and let the morning do what mornings are supposed to do. The job offer came in mid-April, and I almost didn't take it. Consolidated Industrial Group, a larger firm out of Nashville, Tennessee, had been courting me for 3 months through a recruiter I'd worked with years back. Regional Vice President of Sales, overseeing 7 states, significant equity package, a team of 14. The kind of offer that would have made 35-year-old me drive faster on the highway just thinking about it. But I had Lily and Owen. I had a custody arrangement rooted in Cincinnati. I had a school district I'd specifically chosen, a backyard Owen had already decided was his domain, and a daughter who just told me she wanted to join the swim team at the community center down the street. I sat with the offer for 2 weeks without telling anyone except Dr. Holt. Walk me through the actual obstacle, Holt said in our session. The custody order, I said. It's Ohio-based. Moving out of state with primary physical custody requires either Jolene's consent or a court modification. And what does your attorney say? Patricia says we have a strong argument. The position is a significant career advancement. I'm the primary custodial parent. The kids would be relocating with me into a stable environment. She thinks Judge Hargrove would approve it. What does your gut say? I thought about that. That Nashville is far enough to make Jolene's every other weekend visitation complicated. That the kids would lose proximity to their mother. Holt looked at me steadily. You're a man who does what's right, he said. You already know where that leads. He was right. I filed the relocation motion in late April. Patricia argued on the merits, career advancement, stable custodial environment, continued access for Jolene through scheduled extended visits and regular video calls. Jolene's attorney objected on the grounds of disruption to the children's relationship with their mother. Judge Hargrove heard both sides over 2 sessions. In the second session, he asked me directly whether I had considered the impact on the children's relationship with their mother. I said, yes, Your Honor, which is why my proposal includes extended summer visitation for Ms. Harrington, 2 additional school break visits per year beyond the standard order, and a commitment to maintaining regular video contact. I'm not trying to remove her from their lives. I'm trying to build a better one for them. Hargrove studied me for a moment. Then he approved the relocation. Jolene didn't call me after the ruling. She didn't need to. Dennis texted me 2 days later. She's upset, but she knows you're doing right by the kids. For what it's worth. I texted back. Tell her to use every visit. They need her. I meant that. We moved to Nashville in June, just after school let out. I had found a house in a neighborhood called Bellevue. Newer construction, good schools, a street where kids actually played outside in the evenings. Owen decided the backyard was a different planet from the Cincinnati backyard, which required a full recategorization of his imaginary geography. Lily found a community pool within 48 hours and immediately asked about swim team registration. I enrolled her the following Monday. My parents drove down to help us settle in. Mom cried when she left, which she denied. Dad gave me the same handshake and shoulder grip he'd given me outside the courthouse in February. Some gestures carry more than language can. The new job was everything the offer had described. The team was sharp, the territory was wide, and the work had the kind of forward momentum I'd been missing for 2 years. I wasn't using my skills to maintain something that was slowly falling apart. I was using them to build something new, and the difference in what that felt like was not subtle. Kimberly Winters texted me in late May. She'd gotten my number from the mutual friend who'd introduced us at that fundraiser, with my prior permission. She said she'd heard I was relocating and wanted to say she thought that sounded like a brave move. I told her I wasn't sure it was brave so much as necessary. She replied, those are usually the same thing. We talked on the phone twice before the move. Long conversations. The kind where you look up and realize 90 minutes have passed, and it didn't feel like 90 minutes. She was funny in a dry, understated way that took a beat to land. She asked about the kids with genuine interest. She didn't perform anything. I told her I'd be in Cincinnati in August for Owen's birthday. He wanted to visit my parents, and had specific plans involving my father's garage and some project they'd been collaborating on. I asked if she wanted to get dinner that weekend. She said yes without hesitating. That was enough to go on. August came in hot and green, the way August does in Ohio when it's decided to remind you what summer actually means. Owen's birthday weekend was everything he designed it to be. Friday at my parents' place in Loveland. 2 full days in my father's garage working on a model engine kit that had been Owen's singular focus for 3 months. My father had the patience of a man who has spent decades with machinery that requires attention, and Owen had found his people. Lily read by the pool and occasionally wandered in to observe and comment. I helped when I was useful and got out of the way when I wasn't. On Saturday evening, I drove back into Cincinnati for dinner. Kimberly had suggested a restaurant in Hyde Park, a neighborhood I knew well, which I appreciated. She was already at the table when I arrived, looking at the menu with the focused attention of someone who takes food seriously, and she looked up when I walked in and smiled in the way I'd remembered from the fundraiser. Direct, uncomplicated, real. We talked for 3 hours. About her late husband, who she spoke of without performance, with the matter-of-fact honesty of someone who has genuinely processed grief rather than decorated it. About her work. She ran a small landscape architecture firm she'd built after her husband died, something she'd started as a side project and expanded out of necessity and then out of love for it. About my kids and her 2 grown stepchildren, who she stayed in close contact with and who apparently approved of her new business venture with the kind of vocal pride that made her smile when she talked about them. At the end of the evening, she said, "You're easier to talk to than I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked. "Someone more guarded," she said. "You've been through a lot of hard things recently. People usually build walls." "I build a few," I said. "I just don't live in them." She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that sounds like something loosening, like a window opening in a room that's been closed too long. We said good night in the parking lot. She said she'd like to do this again. I said I would too. No urgency, no pressure, just 2 people who'd found something worth coming back to and were smart enough not to rush it. I drove back to Loveland and sat on my parents' back porch in the August dark, listening to the cicadas work themselves up. My dad came out eventually and sat in the chair beside me with a glass of iced tea. "Good evening," he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Good evening." He nodded and didn't ask anything else. That's the thing about men who've built good lives. They recognize the sound of one being built somewhere nearby, and they don't need to press it into a conversation. Jolene called that Sunday to talk to the kids before we drove back to Nashville. She and Lily talked for 20 minutes about swim team. She and Owen talked for 4 minutes about the engine kit, which was about Owen's attention ceiling for phone calls. When Owen handed the phone back to me, I said, "They're doing great, Jolene." A pause. Then, quietly, "I know. Thank you for that, Mal." That was the most honest exchange we'd had since before everything fell apart. I didn't try to extend it. I just said, "I'll have him call you Wednesday," and left it there. The drive back to Nashville on Sunday afternoon was 4 hours of audiobook for me and a movie on the tablet for the kids. Somewhere in Tennessee, Owen fell asleep against the window. Lily had her headphones on and was mouthing words to whatever she was listening to with the unself-conscious confidence of a kid who doesn't know anyone's watching. I drove through the green Tennessee hills and thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The evidence, the confrontations, the courtrooms, the empty house in Hyde Park, the letter at the bottom of the box. I thought about the 1,012 entries in that calendar log, and the 18 months before that when I'd been keeping it without knowing I'd ever need it, just because those days mattered to me and I wanted a record of them. I thought about what Dr. Holt had said in one of our last sessions. A man's character isn't tested by the easy years. It's measured by what he builds when everything he thought was solid turns out not to be. The Nashville skyline came into view as the sun dropped behind the hills. Owen stirred and looked out the window. "Are we home?" he asked, still half asleep. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "We're home." And that was the truest thing I'd said in a long time.